All right. Good morning. Everyone can hear me okay? All right. So today we have a little bit more of an intimate crowd. Typically I would be up on a stage. I think I'm right here at eye level. Hopefully that's okay. You can see me okay. You can see Reggie, of course. I want to thank all of our LGW participants for being here today. Thank you for being here. Sonia, thank you for bringing your class. Always really strong with the networking and always a great show, a good show of support for former LGW folks. And Reggie, I want to thank you for being here as well. This is a little bit unique, I would say, because we oftentimes don't get a chance to interview one of our former and existing clients. Most times I'm talking to someone who we don't have a lot of history on. So Reggie should be really afraid of today's conversation because we know intimately about his company. What we strive to do here at PNC, and I used to say this in my former corporate banking role when I led corporate for us, both here in GWA and also in Baltimore, was that we seek to bank companies from cradle to grave. And that might sound kind of scary, but effectively we look to bank folks from their infancy for when they get started all the way until they have an exit event. I think, Reggie, you've had a few of those. And so today we're going to maybe start there. If you think about when Reggie started the company back in 1999, we didn't know you back then. We actually didn't meet you until after you had maybe a challenging event. The company was struggling. You then found a way to get some funding. You've taken the company public twice. Again, another very unique experience. And then most recently in June of this year, you had a big investment come in from Blackstone. And so I'm curious, what portion of your life cycle would you say you're in now? And how are you currently operating within the company today?
Yeah, it's a great question. So first, thank you for everyone for joining. Thanks, PNC, for the partnership. You guys have been with us for a long time now, and it's great to continue growing. But look, from the life cycle question, I would say, I'm not going to say early innings, but we believe we're kind of in the second, third inning of this game. There's so much digitization going on. It was accelerated by the pandemic because it kind of went counterintuitive. I don't know if I would have guessed how digitization went so fast when the pandemic hit. That was one of the benefits. A lot of negatives, of course, but that was one of the benefits. And so our view is that when you look at almost any company, digitizing it and leveraging technology is really becoming a core competency. That was a famous quote by some different folks at large companies, which is GE famously said, we're no longer an industrial company, we're a software company, because software kind of drives so much of business. I think PNC has probably shared something similar. So you're seeing so much of technology just in the early innings, and of course we all know now about AI. So our view is that in our business, which is we do event management software, and we're in the business of bringing people together, and there's so many interactions that will occur in person, offline, and different ways to increase it. So we think that we're still pretty early, which is why we just recently sold to Blackstone. We were a public company, and we went, it's called going private, and Blackstone bought it. And then a lot of people say, hey, how long's your earn-out? We have no earn-out. We're staying because we want to, and if Blackstone asked us, my leadership team, to stay, and that's because we believe we have a long track ahead of us.
Well, that's great. So when we first met Reggie and Reggie's company, we were primarily a treasury management provider. So the company was really cash rich, had a lot of liquidity on its balance sheet. We managed that money for quite some time. Shameless plug here, we led your debt facility for a number of years, so a $500 million facility. It was $125 million that we led coming from PNC with a group of other banks that we brought in. And when Blackstone came in, tell us about what you look like today. I'm sure it's all about scale, so a $5 billion equity investment, but there's also a debt facility that you now have in place. Does that change the dynamic of where you are today and how you operate the company on a going forward basis?
Yeah, sure. So I think a lot of companies have changed, in particular since the fourth quarter of 22. So let's just call it a little more than a year ago. We were back to the kind of the go-go days. And what happened, especially in technology during the pandemic, any digital company was just doing so well. And all of us understand why, because we probably spent more time on social media, we spent more time clearly with Zoom and all kinds of technology. And so during that time, it was kind of the go-go days. And what I mean by that is people were, once again going against I call the fundamental natures of business, which is they weren't focused on. At the end of the day, every company's based on, cash flow. What's their future cash flow? So we always go through cycles every 10 years where we violate that principle. Happened in 2000. It happened again for the banks maybe in 2008 or 9. We're kind of corrected the cycle about a year ago. So you're just going to have that happen because the memory of most people just fades and people get exuberant again. And so having said that kind of cycle, for us in debt, I had never had debt before until we were private for 14 years, and then in 2013 we went public. And so still no debt, and I was against debt because we had a near-death experience in 2001 and didn't have debt then, but I always, kind of like you run your life sometimes, which is no debt, just live on your cash flow and, kind of take control of things. You don't want to be controlled by folks. That was kind of my attitude. But it was the wrong thing because once we went private with a firm called Vista Equity Partners. In 2016, they bought us and took us private. They leveraged debt. I was a little scared of it because I was like, never had debt before. And then when you understand debt, it does a couple things. One is it helps you leverage your equity. So as you grow your business, you don't have to give away the ownership as much away. But the second thing it does, it creates a discipline. So in the end, we had debt for the first time in our 17-year history, and I learned about it, which again PNC did. But in the end, now with the same kind of model, as our company's gotten stronger, we're about 5,000 people. We're kind of globally, a lot of different businesses, but we're able to leverage debt in a more suitable manner because we're confident in the way our business is going. And when you're confident in your future, then you can create a capital structure that optimizes ownership. It leverages the way you can run your business more. And so now we're very friendly towards debt because we're comfortable of how it positions us. So it's been an interesting journey for me, learning about debt and just how to use it.
Well, we love when our clients repay their debts.
Yeah.
And as a result, we would love to do it again for you if there's an opportunity.
Happy to do it.
Okay. So for a lot of years, I would say there were two technology executives, I would say, that were in our community for whom your reputations kind of preceded you. And I would say it was you and Michael Saylor at MicroStrategy.
It's an interesting comparison.
I
know Mike really well.
And I wouldn't quite say for the same reasons. But neither.
I own no Bitcoin, unfortunately, especially after the last week of its run up.
So the common story that we heard, and this is only because we didn't have a chance to really meet because you didn't need debt for so long, so we had no reason really to meet with you other than meeting with your, kind of your treasury partners. Was that Reggie was this unbelievably hard-driven guy. Oftentimes, I think it was told to me that your office sat right off of the elevator bank.
Still does.
So you could see who was coming and going out of that space. Now, what I'll tell you is I would say it's been consistent in me having the chance to meet you, but what has struck me most last year when you became a laureate for the Junior Achievement Gala that we had, and then I've just had an opportunity to interact with you. I think we hung out a little bit at your house. It's just your personality, the energy, just your passion for what you do. Talk to us about that. Where did that come from? Is that innate in who you are? Or is that something that you've kind of grown over time?
So let me justify that my office is still when you come off our elevator. I like it because it creates energy for me. So what people don't understand is to get energized. There's a lot of things you hear. If you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. All of you've heard that. But kind of what gives me energy and passion is I really do love the event industry. I've been involved in events since I was in high school. I was very involved in student government and so forth. So I've kind of like one of these guys that loved organizing a car wash in high school, right? So honestly, those guys, the passion for what we do, because I love bringing people together, that human connection. My office is there because I get energy when I just watch people, like our customers, come in. Even if there's the vendors coming in, I like, some people like being at a coffee shop and just letting all the kind of frenetic energy around you rather than being in your, let's say, at home working. So I kind of derive energy from that. But I'll tell you what's given me the most energy is for me is watching our employees grow. I'm very involved with HR. I probably spend about 50% of my time on people. The first 1,000 employees, I probably interviewed 800 to 900 of them personally. Because my view is just simply this: you hire the right people. And this is, I'm going to say this because we have a few customers here, including PNC Bank.
Yes, we are.
But talking to a customer is interesting, but getting a good employee is way more interesting because they'll service 100 customers. I can only talk to one. So my view is if you just hire the right people, they'll talk to 100 employees every year for the next 10 years. How many customers can I talk to? So what's really more useful in my time is really hiring the best people. And so then, having said that, I would go down to the colleges myself, like UVA, Penn State, JMU, Virginia Tech, you name the university. I used to go, sometimes I'd drive down to Blacksburg 3 times in a year to meet with candidates and hire really good, what I call the DNA of your company. And so having said that, I love watching people when you recruit them out of college and 15 years later, they're a vice president or a senior director or whatever it is. And it just gets me excited to watch that. And that's really where I get my energy from, is watching other people evolve, because it's no longer about, I've been able to meet, fortunately, a lot of my personal objectives, but now it's just fun to watch other people grow.
You sure it's not a control feature?
Well, maybe a little bit of that also.
Okay.
Maybe a little bit of that. No, but so that passion, I think, comes from watching other people grow. And look, I get excited. I want people to think that watching our customers when they come up and say, we had a great event. We had 1,000 people and your software, your mobile app did this, or whatever it is. It's an exciting space. It's also something that when you do have control, meaning to be able to make big movements on stuff, it's interesting. Like when you could say, hey, this is where a new vision is coming from. Let's get X amount of people to start working on it. It is fun to be able to make impact. And by the way, I would say, if I had to say the number one reason why an employee is excited about a business is if they feel they're making impact. Just in life, it doesn't matter if when you retire and let's say you have wealthy people, what they need to make impact. It doesn't matter if it's a nonprofit, doesn't matter if it's on education, they want to make impact. So you have to be able to make impact. And so for me, I can still make impact, therefore it's exciting for me.
No, it's great. So let's stay on the word impact. What impact did your parents have on where you are? I listened to the story that you had during the laureate reception on how your dad landed here, immigrated from India, thought he was going to Manhattan, but then, of course, that was not the Manhattan.
It was the wrong Manhattan.
It was the wrong Manhattan. So which Manhattan was it, and ultimately where did you land, and how did that shape kind of where you are now?
Jermaine's talking about, he's kind of ready to ruin my joke, but I'll say it again.
Okay. Sorry.
My father moved to this country, he wanted to come to the center of the country, so he moved to Manhattan, but it was the wrong Manhattan. I was born in Manhattan, Kansas. So... And I always make a joke that we doubled the Indian population when I was born there. There weren't many Indians in Manhattan, Kansas when I was born. Look, my father came here. Typical immigrant story. He was getting his master's in engineering, and so he moved to this country. And so we lived in Manhattan, lived all around. But I grew up pretty much in Alexandria, Virginia, since '75. So I've been here. My mom lives in the same house that I grew up in, still. In terms of my parents and the influence, different people have different influence of parents. My parents were very much typical Indian parents. My mom cried when I told her after high school that I wasn't going to be a doctor or an engineer. And then after I graduated and I told her I was a lawyer after I graduated from college, I went to law school. And she just assumed I was going to be an immigration lawyer, literally, because that's the lawyers they knew about. And so all these typical stories. But I think, look, we grew up in a very strong, family environment. I have a brother and sister that also live in the area. And so what I would say to you is that a lot of, the imprint of your parents is brought on you. For us, I think it was a little bit being hungry. Because when you're immigrant, my father had a tough life when we grew up here. We had a very loving life, and I don't really remember it deeply, but it brings you hunger because you have to do stuff. You're not connected. You don't have money. If you want to succeed, you just have to do it through hard work. And I think so. It's pretty typical. But I would say that my parents invested a lot in us. They would take whatever they had, put it in our education, our activities. I have 3 small kids now that range from 9 to 16, and I can appreciate what my parents have done because it's hard to do a career and to put time into your kids to grow them. And so I was very, very fortunate to have that. And my mom, my mom was actually always worked since I grew up. And so it was kind of great to see both role models working, but that was, my mom had a lot of influence. When I started my company, I didn't have a technology background, and when I hired one of my business partners, his name is Dave Quattrone. Dave was our CTO. I didn't know much about tech because I was a lawyer, and my mom interviewed Dave. And same with my sister. They interviewed him because they're both in technology. And so Dave got hired because they approved him. And they will never let him forget that because, because I didn't know how to interview him. And so they were actually very influential in the business.
And is there anything unique you would say about this region? Growing up in Alexandria, my kids are here. They've always been Fairfax County kids. I don't know if you were in Alexandria City or in Fairfax.
I was in Fairfax, yeah.
In Fairfax. I mean, talk to us about that. I mean, was there anything unique about the region that you would say that
I think
kind of led to your entrepreneurism, what you wanted to do in life?
Yeah, I think I would directly attribute DC into the success of Cvent. Disproportionate. I'll just give you 3 reasons. The first reason I came up with my idea of Cvent because I'd started a networking group called the Indian CO Technology Council in 1996. And it's funny he mentioned Mike Saylor because Mike's partner was a guy named Sanju Bansal. Sanju was the co-founder. They were fraternity brothers at MIT, and he was the vice chairman. So Sanju was one of my close friends, and we started the Indian CO Network together. And basically, I was organizing events like this, and we ended up growing it tremendously. And I was running about 40 events a year while working full-time, 70 hours a week as a corporate lawyer, 60 hours a week. And then what I realized is how painful it was to organize events. And that gave me, I found a pain point, which was organizing events, and the aspirin was Cvent. So anyways, so the direct idea came from organizing events, and DC was a perfect kind of place for me to start the organization because the technology community was budding. And so it was kind of an open place where I was able to create this organization, which led to the absolute founding of Cvent. That was kind of number 1. But number 2 is that when we had some struggles, we almost went bankrupt in 2001. And during that time, I could tell you if you're in Silicon Valley, we would have went bankrupt because there it's a mercenary, environment where there's so many good jobs. Why would you stay at a job that's struggling? You wouldn't. You just go jump to the next hot startup. And candidly, there wasn't as many in DC back then. And so people, it wasn't as Machiavellian or it wasn't as Darwinistic. And I think that was to our advantage because during the difficult times, my employees stayed, and you need that. And so I think if you were there, the ecosystem would have been very different, wouldn't have been as supportive. There, it's like, if you don't do well, if you go big or go home. And if you don't do well, you just quickly lose your people and you die. 100% we would have had that happen. So I directly attribute, and then I'll tell you the third thing, we raised a ton of money, and I had about 100 individual investors, and I got it from what I call the technology glitterati of Washington. So the president of NASDAQ, Al Berkeley, or the CEO of Verizon, or whoever it might be, got a lot of support from the technology community based out of DC to support. And again, so I directly attribute those 3 examples. And the fourth one, because I keep having good reasons, is the employees. Look, DC is an undertapped, it's always been an undertapped area. You probably heard the stats that the DC area has more engineers, I think the most or second most than anyone, because we have the government. And so there's all kinds of environments here that have created the right, place and ecosystem for Cvent to, start, survive, and thrive. So I give a lot to the greater Washington area, and I think it's just continuing to evolve.
Yeah, I would argue that we still have, less representation of technology here in this community than you would think that we would otherwise because of the engineers, because we fight against the federal government. How did you make it? How did you survive in that space? How do we do a better job of keeping our kids who are here to remain interested in remaining in Fairfax County, across the region? Because it's a real challenge. I mean, when I look out on the landscape of who we are as a community, it's still dominated by the federal government. There's only a few examples, I would say, of companies like yours. That's why I brought up MicroStrategy, because I think it's a very similar story. But we don't have a lot of Cvents. Why not? How can we do a better job?
Look, I think partly because people do go to other areas. There's so many interesting things to go to. Maybe instead of a lack of tech companies, there's so many interesting opportunities from a global basis here. But look, I've always been surprised because to me, again, it's a great place to kind of run a business from here to Europe, from here to getting up the East Coast. Again, you have really bright people here. The wages are less than certain places, like certainly Silicon Valley and New York. So I'm a little surprised still that the DC area, and again, so many engineers and so much talent here. Look, what may be lacking a little bit is the entrepreneur spirit, because a lot of people, there's a lot of lawyers here, a lot of doctors here, a lot of areas where entrepreneurship may not be as celebrated as some other areas like Boston and New York and maybe Austin now and some other places. But I think it's growing. And I think that as we have more successful companies around the area, it's gotten a lot more, though, because when you look at the amount of companies that have relocated here from headquarters, whether it's a Hilton or VW, I mean, there's more and more business being done here. And over time, the commercial enterprises will overtake the government, in my view, because it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It's still not accelerated as much as we'd all like. But I think it's got the right ecosystem because now funding and so forth is more nimble, not just going to San Francisco. And just in general, you got bright people who have great talent, and that's just the recipe of success from a mid to long term.
Yeah, I would say we need to continue to invest in folks like yourself. I think we need to congratulate. Maybe we should do that right now for an entrepreneur like Reggie. It takes a lot of vision and it's quite a bit of risk. And so thank you for stepping on that plank. So when I think about your business, just in terms of what it means and the economic cycle that we might be in, your business is probably somewhat representative of the economic activity that's out there in the marketplace. When you go back to 2020, that had to have been a really scary time. We would not be in the room that we're in right now. I think many of the event planning opportunities probably went away. I mean, what were you worried about back then, and how did you get through it?
So let me give you kind of start. So we've been through extraordinarily difficult times. Back in, when I started the company in '99, raised about $17 million. We grew. Initially, I funded it kind of out of my parents' basement. Typical entrepreneur story. I was a corporate lawyer, so I knew not to dilute, which means give out too much of your equity too early. And so then, I funded it with my credit cards. My parents liquidated their 401k, very typical story. And I tell you this because, in 2000, it was the dot-com boom. And just everyone thought they were going to be billion-dollar companies. That's what everyone thought. And so we kind of did it on our own, and then our competitors raised about $1 billion in venture capital, mostly out of Silicon Valley, and that was in the space called online event registration, right? Most people haven't heard of it. And so all of a sudden we had to kind of make bigger movements because we had 6 of us, and we're like, okay, we have 2 developers. They have 100 developers, and they're being funded by the top firms. So we quickly raised $17 million from a lot of the local investors here, and then we grew from 6 to 125. Make a long story short, perfect storm hit, dot-com meltdown, September 11th, and reality hit, and we basically had to cut 80% of our staff. And we went from 125 to 24 people. And the reason I tell you this is that was extraordinarily difficult. And the reason that was so tough was simply because we didn't know if our model worked. So we didn't know if the internet was working, if the model worked, and I certainly lost confidence in myself as an entrepreneur because I raised $17 million, blew through 16.6 million of it, and had had 400,000 in the bank, and had built a $1.5 million revenue company. So all of a sudden you're like, okay, you spent 16 million to build $1.5 million. Candidly, you suck. So I just thought maybe I wasn't supposed to be an entrepreneur. I'll go back to being a lawyer, right? And so you lose confidence in yourself. But my whole team lost confidence because we were a lot of young entrepreneurs. And so, but during that time is where you dig deep and see if you really believe in it, and if you think, you really have what it takes. And most entrepreneurs give up. Matter of fact, most people shouldn't be entrepreneurs. I would say 98% of the population shouldn't, because they're not willing to make the sacrifices, because they don't realize that most companies fail. You only read about the successes, and if you look at the ones that fail, they mostly fail or they never get above a small size, which is okay. We were looking to do something scaled, and what I learned is that very few people can put the kind of the sacrifices. I didn't have a salary for 3 years. I lived at home with my parents till I used to always joke some kind of the Indian George Costanza, because I lived at home till I was 33, 34 years old. When I got married at 35, my brother and I were living together. He's a physician, and he said, "You got to move out of mom and dad's house." I said, "I have no money." And he said, "All right, I'll buy a condo in Roslyn, and can you just pay your half of the mortgage payments?" I said, "I could do that." So I lived in the small room of the house. This is 35 years old. I'm not some young guy. And when I got married, my wife moved in with us. So the 3 of us lived together. And we lived in the small room, and imagine the closet, sharing 2 of us in the small closet. But that's the sacrifices you make, right? And it wasn't until I was 40 that I actually was in a reasonable position economically to afford stuff. And so you don't hear those things. And so those big sacrifices. But why that's important is during that time is when we built the culture of Cvent between 2001 and 2005, because we didn't raise money. We just kind of focused on the fundamentals. And so the same thing happened in 2020, to get to your point. When 2020 hit, it was devastating. 96% of our revenue was in-person events. And we had 3,800 employees or something, 3,500. When 98% of your revenue gets wiped out and you're that big, you can't just be a nimble startup, right? And so then, and we didn't know when it was going to end. And so with that 96 events being canceled, because we did, let's call it mid-sized to large events, and that was the worst set industry. It was the bottom 1%. Hotels got hit, but no, they still could get consumer travelers and, airlines were going, but who was doing mass events? That was completely cut. So we were, I would say, out of a typical 1,000 companies, we were the bottom 2 in being hit the hardest. And so then that was an extraordinarily difficult time. And but because we went through what we did in 2001, and that was even worse because we were facing bankruptcy, we didn't know if we had the ability, but here we had more confidence and we were more ready. So it was an extremely difficult time, but because we went through these difficult journeys, which all of us do professionally, it prepares you when that next hurdle comes. And so for us, we use it as an advantage. And when I say advantage, I'm like, look at our competitors. Now, there's 1,400 event technology companies, if you believe it. It's a big ecosystem. People don't realize that $1.4 trillion is spent on meetings and events, business meeting events. It's not consumer events like concerts or sporting events. This is business events around the world. It's bigger than all the GDPs of every country except 11. That's how big it's spent on meetings and events like this. And so having said that, those lessons of what we learned in 2001 through 5 is what carried us. We pivoted hard, a lot of agility, and we end up creating a virtual product that we didn't have, and then that kind of carried us through to now we're back in person. And but it was a difficult time, and I think this is just what we all experience in our business lives, our personal lives. It's good to go through humps because they just make you stronger and stronger, especially if you learn from them on the way down. And so for us, I always have a saying, you learn more on the way down than you do on the way up. And because you really think of all the things you did right or wrong when it's going down. When things are going great, you don't think much about it. You think everything you're doing is right. And so you're not as critically thinking about what worked. But it also, it's all up here and here. And that gets built over time. So that's why we're able to pivot with that difficult time.
No, that's great. I always tell people you don't really know what you have until you go through a really tough time. It's really easy to have relationships when things are going well. My wife, who lived with me in Petworth back in the early 2000s, it was not a great time. I had shootings going on around me. I was on the Orange Hat Patrol. She made a commitment to me, and I made a commitment back to her. I can't let you pass up on the moment to talk about your wife and that commitment that she made to you early on when you had nothing. Sounds like a great story.
Yeah, look, you need a strong ecosystem, which of course starts with your core, whether it's your closest friends, whether it's your family. In my case, I was very lucky. I told you my parents, they both worked for the government, liquidated their 401k to back my company up. That's just kind of a little bit of the culture where they're just like, hey, whatever my kids want to do, I'm going to back them. And that was very fortunate. But the other thing is, with my wife, her name's Dorini, she was in banking, and she, has been super supportive. And look, I'm going to be very honest with people. Because the business, she was a VP at one of the large banks when we got married. And so my company was failing when we met and so forth. But, fortunately, things turned around. But during that time, I told her, that I don't know how this is going to turn out. And I remember there's two kind of very personal stories. One is that there was a mentor of mine, his name's Ashok Trivedi, who runs a multi-billion-dollar company called iGate. And he gave me advice because when I was kind of meeting different women and just kind of dating. He goes, look, whatever you do when you marry, and it's, again, that doesn't matter for man or woman, but when you marry your spouse, make sure they believe in you, because if what you don't want to do is have your business fail and you lose your business and your spouse.
That's right.
Right? And they said a person can't take both. So make sure whoever you marry, it's for the right reasons, because, high-risk businesses, that's what happens. And where people get crushed is when their business goes down and then they lose their support mechanism. Like, your parents aren't going to ever abandon you. Your siblings won't. But you've seen spouses. It's not even that they're abandoning you maybe because of that. It's because of the pressure that's going on. And so I've been very lucky to have a wife that's very supportive. We went through some tough times, and when I say supportive, she put her career on the back end. I told her, it's sad to admit this, but I said, you were a single mother. I'm focusing purely on this, and you can only count on me a little bit. You can't count on me because I got to put all my time into Steve, and I'm traveling around the world. I mean, I just can't do it. And this is, so I need to make sure that you're okay with that. And if you're not, then let's work through that. But she was like, look, let's do that. So that's the kind of support that I got. I'm very fortunate to have a spouse that's willing to do that. And it's a sacrifice, it was a sacrifice on my kids. And I've tried to better to be much, stronger about work-life balance. What happened in 2020 allowed me to spend a lot more time with my kids, which has been great. But the point is, you need an ecosystem to support you, which starts with your core ecosystem. And so, again, I've been very, very fortunate to have that with the family, strong knit family. I don't know how people do it without that, because it's so hard to start a business, go through tough times. You just need people to support you, whether it's mentors, whether it's the community, whether it's your family, whether it's your spouse. So again, I think these are all parts of the things that I got very fortunate in making successful, because I don't know how you do it without that, because we all go through tough times.
Yeah, you got to have a great partner, without a doubt. So I'm going to take you back to the business side of things here for a moment. Talk to us about where you think we are in the business paradigm. 50% I think is what we can count on here at the height of this is kind of work from home, work in the office. I think 50% is the capacity that we've reached here in the region. How has that impacted your business? Where do you think we are in that business paradigm? Is this likely the place that we're going to land long term?
You talk about work from home or
work from home? Work from home. I'll say work from the office, because we're trying to get people back in the office as much as we can. Just because I think it's important to create those relationships that we were talking about here just a few minutes ago, and also with our employees. I'm like you. I like to see, touch, feel, motivate folks to help us do what we're trying to get accomplished here at PNC. So where do you think we land on that? Has it changed your business materially, and do you see any big changes as we go forward?
Yeah, so look, I have very strong views on this. We spent a lot of cycles on this, because if you got it wrong with your employees, especially in tech companies, you'd lose your employees. So we spent a lot of time, and look, I'll be honest, I think so many companies have done it wrong. I'm actually shocked at how poorly they did it. I'm being very direct. One is it's a 10, 20-year play. So whatever decision you make, don't make a quick decision, because you're committed for 10 or 20 years. And so for us, we didn't even go back to work till September of 22. People are like, why? And I'm like, because it's a decade play. What you don't want to do is have, if you remember, it wasn't that long ago when people were like, I'm not going to come back without a vaccine. I'm not going to come back. There were all kinds of reasons. So I didn't want to get into that politics when we came back. So that wasn't an argument when people came back in September of 22. That was point number one. Take your time. It's a 10, 20-year decision, because once you do it, it's very hard to change it. Right. So that number second is that, look, I'm a little shocked that people gave the kind of flexibility they did, because the whole point is, if you're going to come back to the office, everyone's got to be there. Doesn't mean all 5 days a week, but don't do like, come in whenever you want. It's flexible. Then it's like, why am I going to come in because only 12% of the people are in the office? So I'll be honest, I don't understand that. And I've talked to a lot of my CEO friends. I'm like, no, you pick the dates. I don't care if it's 1 day a week, 2 days, 3, pick them, and everyone comes in. That's the end of it. Because the whole point of coming in is your colleagues are there. And for most companies, if you're larger, you're talking to other people outside the office to begin with. So you better have the people that are here, otherwise you're on Zoom the whole time with other people. So I have very strong views, but the biggest thing I'll tell you is that in tech world's different than others. So when Blackstone bought us, they're 5 days a week. Okay? It's a very strong culture. And Steve Schwartzman, the CEO of Blackstone, and just so people know, it's the largest private equity firm in the world, about $1 trillion. And Steve has very strong views on stuff. And in a good way, and he believes 5 days a week. And so we're 2 days a week at Cvent. We come in Wednesdays and Thursdays, and it's kind of mandatory. And but having said that, where I think it's going to go is it depends on the sector, and the sector's tech is a little bit more fluid because you can work remotely more. But I think it's an important business thing, because when people come in the office, it creates discipline. When you're working from home, your discipline isn't there. You just have some things that you just need to go interact with people on a professional basis. And the biggest thing is how do you mentor the young people? Like, I look around the audience, most of the people here, 90% of the people in the room, they were mentored by somebody, right? And so, the under 30 is easy in my view, or under 28, over, let's just call it 40, because we've been working 15, 20 years. It's that crowd that has young kids that it's a sacrifice from their view compared to for the 3 years they're working from home. But in the end, I think that it will continue to evolve. But look, I do think it's going to be flexible. We don't anticipate changing hours, 2 days, but I think it's going to change. I think it's going to be a permanent change for a large sector. But again, every sector is different, and for our sector, tech is different because again, you can work from anywhere. So we're in a different position. But I think that there's pros and cons. One thing that's been great, it has made a work-life balance a lot better. The problem I have a concern with the younger generation, especially ones that are 2-3 years out of college, they can't even imagine working 5 days in an office. They think it's impossible to do, right? And I'll tell you, when we go back 5 days, when we have what we call in weeks, we'll go a few times a year where we bring all people from around the world in, so we make everyone work 5 days. I was exhausted. I got to tell you,
yeah,
for guys,
it's kind of like making that jump from college into going into a workplace, right? You're like, wow, you actually work 9 hours a day.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah. And I'll just tell you, I was tired.
Consistently?
Yeah, and I was like, wow, boy, I used to do this. I had to remind myself I did this for 25 years. So but look, in the end, that balance is happening. I'm glad there's a shift towards in the office, so it doesn't make the ones that want to do a hybrid approach not such bad people. And so, and I think we're getting to I think in the next 6 to 12 months, you will start getting to where you're going to get to, is my view.
Yeah, our focus here at PNC has been very similar. We focus mostly on our leaders because we think in order for you to be a leader, you really have to be visible, present, to show up, and then also in our young people. What we do every day, it's an apprenticeship type job, and so you have to, in order for you to learn, like you can't learn through osmosis, you have to be here in order for you to learn how to do it. And so we put a lot of emphasis and focus within those two groups. Everybody in the middle has been a little more difficult,
tougher, yeah.
right? Because
they don't need the mentorship.
Well, exactly. They don't need the mentorship. They have the networks. I would say that at some point to advance your career, and if you want to be a leader, though, you do need to be present.
No, I agree. Really, it makes look for us. We're spread around the world, so it is a little. PNC is obviously way bigger than us, but so that's a little different because what the challenge we have is when someone comes in and they're like, all day I'm on Zoom calls anyways. So what's the point of me being here? And of course, it's hard to say. Well, we might run into you at the coffee stand, and you say one thing to me, and all of a sudden, a lot of things change in the company. It's hard for people to process that because we need information from the front line. And when I notice on Zoom is my interactions with people went down by 10x because I just had everything was structured. I would never talk to candidly an associate or a senior associate because they just weren't in my ecosystem to talk to. And when they did, it was like 40 people on the call, and then who's going to speak up on the call. You just tend to focus on the people who are more senior. And so then I just realized that I didn't know any of the new people that joined. You didn't interact with them, interview them, and you started losing the pulse of the front line. So I know when in person you just have these interactions that you just as a leader, you just can't replace because you start getting a little pulse. That one little thing, instead of going this way, you go this way. But in 10 years from now, you're all the way over there versus all the way over there. Big difference. So that was our view.
Yeah, that's great. So I want to wrap up my questions and then ultimately turn it out to the crowd for some Q&A. But I wanted the final here, which is talk to me about culture, because culture seems to be a big part of who you are. As a CEO for Cvent, clearly your heritage, I think, in your background has also led to the culture that you've bred. At one point, you had the CEO network of Indian CEOs. Like, why was that important? Is there anything about your heritage that's led to the culture that you've bred for Cvent and for how you just manage each and every day?
It's hard to understand how what I think is the right thing manifests from my culture. Definitely part of it, and I know it had an influence. But I generally think these are just general, what I call good principles. Doesn't matter where you're from, what your culture is. It's just basic business processes and business, which is to me, it doesn't matter where you're from. But culture always has a big impact. I know it does, and it might be softer because sometimes it's not hard things. It's just things that just happen. So let me give you kind of from a culture view, and I'll tell you, if I had to pick the 2 or 3 most important things, and I'll start with culture first, is you probably heard this phrase. I'm going to say some common things, but if you haven't heard it, you definitely, culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? For sure. Like, if you have a strong culture, it just gets you over all kinds of things. So culture is, in my view, the 2 most important things in a business, hands down. To me, it's like not even a 0% chance I'm wrong on this. I really mean this. It's just the DNA of your company is your people. It's if you hire smart people and good people, you can't train that. Just versus 80-90% is just the people that you hire already have a certain level that they're willing to achieve. Doesn't mean you can't train people to get better. It doesn't mean you can't do stuff. But if you get the right DNA in that's fundamental. And then the second thing is have the right culture. And the right culture, in my view, is a variety of things. The first is the right culture to hire really good people. So, and I'll give you two examples. I told you in hiring, I'll give you a quote. The CEO of GE, I love Jack Welch because he used to say a lot of great things. I know GE's had some of their struggles recently, but it still was at one point one of the greatest companies in the world. But he'd say, a CEO can focus on strategy, customers, or people. You can't do all three. You can pick one and do really good. And so I told you I tend to focus on people. But if you hire the right DNA, that's the first thing. The second thing is the culture you set. And I'll just tell you how we did at Cvent, is that we focused on entrepreneurship. And what's an entrepreneur? It's an entrepreneur in a mid to large company. And why is that important? Is you empower people to do stuff. And then if you have 1,000 people thinking like entrepreneurs, like this is their company, what we tell them is you got to think this is your company. This is your money you're spending. You don't build a business based on rules. It's by value systems. So everything isn't so bureaucratic. You do the right thing, not what's, if it violates what makes sense and kind of the right thing rather than what's the process, because you have to be agile. And agility, you need to be able to move quickly. So I will tell you that from our view, we've spent so much time on culture because at the end of the day, that's what makes a company scale. That's what makes a company the special sauce. And that's the only differentiator, because people say, hey, you have 1,400 competitors, event technology companies. Why are you number one? Why are you the strongest of the 1,400? It's just simple. Just a lot of same ideas. It's just the people. And so, and execution, but it comes down to culture. So our view is we spend a disproportionate amount of time there when we interview. Look, we'll generally interview people for 8 hours, 7 hours. And people are like, that's crazy. I go, what are you talking about? If you make the wrong hire, do you know how much time you're spending on them? like the amount of time. And we have a culture of winning, which means that we hire someone if they're not doing well. We don't cut bait. We invest. We try to do it better. You know the 80-20 rule? You spend 80% of your time on the bottom 20%. When we should flip it, you should spend 80% of your time on the top 20%. But we don't do that because we tend to, focus on the squeaky wheel. That's just human nature. And so the point is that put the energy up front in, because that's like planning. If you plan 10 hours, you're going to make the next 100 hours go better rather than just jumping to a 100-hour project without planning. Same thing in hiring. So I'm always shocked at how little people interview. When I had people come talk to me, I would say, how long did you spend with that person? They'll say, I spent 40 minutes. I go, 40 minutes? I'll spend 2 hours with the person. How do you get into someone's heart or soul into, if this is the right fit for them? And the reason, if you get the right person, man, they'll hire another 10 people. And then those people will hire another 10. So get that DNA straight with both the people you hire and then setting the right culture. And then everything gets solved based on that, in my view, because that's the only way you can scale. So that's kind of very strong views on culture and just putting a disproportionate energy into it.
I think I'm going to take that one. Lead by values rather than by rules.
Yeah.
I really like that a lot. All right, so I'm going to turn this out to the crowd now. I think we have a microphone that's going around. I'm sure we have a lot of great questions to ask Reggie.
I'm coming.
Reggie, this has been awesome. This is one of the most inspiring conversations I've gotten to hear in a long time, so thank you for doing this. You talk a lot about hiring, and I agree with so many of your views. What jumps off the page at you when you're interviewing a candidate, when you're spending the time with them? What are some of those things that you look for that gets you excited? And if you can think of some off the top of your head, what are some of your favorite interview questions to ask also to get people
Sure.
talking and seeing that authentic response?
So I'll give you two comments on the interview questions. So based on your years of experience, look, we like data. And I'll just tell you, so we do some stuff that I thought was weird before until it finally got validated. Look, if you're under 5 years of college, we ask for your high school GPA, college GPA, SAT. Why? People are like, well, what about my couldn't standardized tests? We also ask activities you're in. We're looking for something to hang our hat on. So whenever we interview a person, I said, where did they cut their teeth? What is, if let's say they're young, 2 years out of college, it's not just their GPA, but get all the data. So first get as much data as possible. Because an interview is just one thing, and people can interview really well. But 10 years of data persist. Like, what makes someone, the number one attribute that I've read about, and I kind of believe, is they say if someone who's there's someone who's conscientious. That actually is the number one attribute to make someone successful. They don't have to be the smartest, but if they're conscientious, they tend to work harder. That's the person who said, I'm not going to go to the party, I'm going to go study for the exam. If you look at those people, they're always in the top 20%. So we try to look at attributes first of data, then are they conscientious? On the entrepreneur question, we just ask, hey, what entrepreneurial thing have you done at your company? They're always like, we tell them what an entrepreneur is. Like, tell me something that you did that was entrepreneurial. It wasn't just doing your job. And, not everyone can come up with stuff because some companies are not entrepreneurial. But those are some examples of questions that we ask. But it starts with data, spend time getting to know them. And what we also do, probably one of the biggest things, is we do, it depends on your age, but for the younger folks, we make them shadow. We spend an hour shadowing. I can't tell you how many people, like, I'll give you an example. My cousin, she went to, I went to UVA undergrad, she went to UVA, she's a bright person. She goes, oh, I'm gonna be working for Booz Allen. I go, what are you doing? She goes, consulting. I go, consulting on what? I don't know, consulting. I'm like, are you kidding me? You don't know. And so you'll be shocked at how little people understand a job. So one of the younger people we shadow, but on the other people, what we do is we want to make sure, I always say this, if you were my brother or sister, or my younger brother or sister, or my kid, would I recommend this job for you? And we always do that because they'll figure it out in 6 months if it's not the right job for them, and they'll leave you. And then you don't have, the cost of hiring someone they leave in 6 months. Extraordinary. So all these things, you try to ferret out. Is it the right job for you? Is it the right job for us? And then trying to find some of these attributes with data or asking questions. So nothing, I don't want to say it's some magic, and then just put time in interviewing. Get a lot of different dimensions. And last thing we do, if you're hiring a manager, we always have the people below them interview them, always. Most companies don't do that, which again is shocking. Like, they're gonna have a perspective that's very different than yours as a leader, because people know how to manage up, but their job is candidly to make their employees happy, right? The customer is the employees, and if they're the manager, you want these people, they might get a different sense than you. Now, there's always a little weird to interview your manager because you're much more particular, because you realize that they're going to tell you what to do. But these are some things that, I don't know, some practices that we've done that I think have worked really well, because you want a holistic view of the person. So that's what I would say. So no necessarily magic questions, but getting all that data and different perspectives.
Hey, Reggie. So thanks for all the comments. And, I think a lot of themes sort of relate to your network, your family, the folks that you've grown up with, right? So do you, and I know a little bit about your team that surrounds you, right? So do you feel a bit of a responsibility to sort of be an outspoken voice for the Indian community, be such a leader in the tech space, be a leader here in the DC tech space? Does that kind of come into play with any of your thoughts on 24 hours of a day?
In terms of being a leader for the community?
Yeah.
Or just in general? I mean, yeah, I think we all have a responsibility, to give back to the community. I think first you start with business. If you build what I tell people is, there's a lot of things I can get involved with, but if you just build a good business and create a lot of jobs, you create a lot of business for vendors to support you, for the ecosystem. That's the number one thing a CEO can do from a community view, is just build a good business. Because without even trying, you're already supporting a lot of people and building your community. So that's number one. Once you do those fundamental things, then as you go, let's say, do stuff that's not core to the business, you're doing it to give back. I love that stuff, because that's, again, what I grew up on. From high school on, I've been so involved. And so on a personal view, from an Indian, kind of, let's say, start with the Indian side, very personal to me. Look, the Indian CEO helped put the Indian community on the map. People didn't realize how many CEOs who were Indian in technology companies. This is 96. We had 120 CEOs who ran at least 10 million in revenue companies. No one would have thought there was 150 CEOs like that in 1996 or 97. So building the community was great for me. Look, I was born in the States. I don't speak Hindi. My name is Reggie. My real name is Rajiv. I was very Americanized, right? And so I wasn't that involved with the Indian community. It wasn't until I started the Indian CO that I started tapping into my own culture. I hadn't visited India in 20 years. So for me, it just didn't matter. But as I got more involved, it brought my culture to me, and that was kind of neat. But getting back to giving back, look, it's important to do that. For me, it's innate. But I think the biggest thing you can do is just build good businesses, or whatever your job is. You don't have to build a business to give back to the community from a fundamental. We need people to be active in other ways. But that's kind of what I've put a lot of my energy into. And look, I've been very involved. I'm less involved now because we do more global stuff, and I have to do stuff globally a little bit more. But I think for me, I think everyone has an obligation to give back to their community, because that's what built this, and it's the shoulders. I built on my business on the shoulders of others, and then others should build it on the shoulders of mine. And again, my belief is that it's very important to do that, because it's also, as you grow your business after 25 years, it's not that satisfying just growing your business. You want to make an outdistance impact in a lot of areas beyond business. So that's at least my personal view.
Reggie, I'm curious about your view on the future of human connection and events as a result of the exponential technologies such as AI. So when you look at 5-10 years ahead, your business focuses on pulling people together for events. How will that evolve and change?
It's a great question. So we learned a lot through virtual events. So I'll just tell you, from a virtual event view, and take Zoom out, which is more 1-to-1 or 1-to-10, it's more, but let's call events versus meetings. So what I'll tell you, we learned a lot just in the last 3 years. I remember when we were going public in 21, so many people said, why would anyone meet in person? People started to just realize it's more convenient, it's cost effective, you can reach out to more people to get involved. They don't have to fly to Vegas, they don't have to fly whatever. So that's the future, and the in-person is just supplemental, right? So it's completely shifted, as everyone knows, that the virtual business, because we had one, it's gone like this, right? I mean, it's shocking how fast. So I think first you learn the fundamental, the power of human connection is irreplaceable. That's fundamental who we are as human beings. And the energy you derive from meeting other people, you didn't realize it. I don't know if you guys remember, but let's say 18 months ago, you couldn't hug someone, and you didn't want to. Like, remember 2 years ago, it was even weird to hug family, right? You didn't want to hug, you didn't want to hug your family. I mean, that's how drastic it was. I'm sure we all remember that. And so then now it's just, you forgot it. So the great thing about the great thing about human beings is we forget, and we tend to embrace the positives. We do. Because you get over things, and so now we just forgot about the pandemic. You almost have to remind yourself that when you see someone, and obviously everyone's in different speeds. Some people may not feel comfortable now, but give it 6 or 12 more months, they will. So I think human connection is irreplaceable. It's fundamental to who we are as people, and so that's number one. In terms of how, let's say, AI or just technology is going to shift that, it's only going to enhance it. I'll give you 2 examples of what we tell people. Like, when you get a group like this together, right? Technology will enhance it, because your goal here is to get some education, get content, and there's ways of now distributing the content more efficiently. And the second thing is, let's say, networking, right? And so how would you make it better? Imagine, technology has it. So first, minimum, you can go somewhere and see everyone that was here. You could have the list. So you saw Fred or Mary over there. You didn't get a chance to really talk to them, said hello, but now you can get in contact with them, as opposed to going to a business card. It could be anywhere for the larger events where you have birds of a feather, where you have, let's say, 1,000-person event, and you find people that are similar to you. They put data in their attendee data. There's so many things that will enhance it. So technology will only enhance the value of going to events, let's say business events. It will only enhance it, because you're able to accomplish something, because before you spend $2,000 flying there in your hotel, $1,000 on the registration fee, technology will make it so it's a higher ROI, so you can justify it. So over time, you'll get more people wanting to do it, because you get a lot out of it. And I think it's going to be more important, because people, if they work from home and they don't interact, like with us, we're bringing more people into the office from other offices, because they are distributing more. And they're not just in our McLean headquarters. And so they moved to North Carolina or whatever. So we're bringing them back to do more meetings, for internal meetings, and then external events where you interact with people. It's just going to be much more, it's just going to be more, not just dynamic, you're going to get more ROI on it. So I think, look, AI, how's that going to do it? It could obviously do an algorithm that says, here are some people you should meet, connect you, and then maybe you meet or you don't. It could be from that all the way to more advanced things. But I think it's only going to evolve it and make it better, and it's going to drive more human connection. Because out of all the people, if there's 1,000 people in the room, how do you meet the right people that make it interesting for you to come back next year to that event? So that's how it's going to evolve.
All right, we have one more question here in the front.
Thank you, Reggie. Outstanding presentation. How would you describe your leadership style, and what percent of your culture is defined by your style?
Asking me would be different than the answer from what you asked my employees and my leadership. I'd say 0% me, all them. No. From a leadership style, what I would tell you is, look, I'm just like any driven entrepreneur. You get pros and cons with founder entrepreneurs. So I'll give you an example. So if someone told me that if I had to go through that wall to get to the other side, I'll probably be one that would have, especially when I was younger, just run full speed and hopefully go through it, and hopefully it's not a cinder block wall. Hopefully it's whatever those walls are made of. Where you can,
Board.
yeah, not particle board, but whatever the. I don't think we have construction people here because I think you're all saying the wrong answers. Particle board's pretty tough. I don't think I can go through that. But anyways, the point is that where if you get, let's say, an operator who grew up, they would go through the wall, go test it, do this and that. They'll get through it. I might get knocked out because it is a particle board wall instead of an easy wall to go through. But if it's not, then I'll be a mile down the road before they get through it. So there's different styles. So entrepreneurs are all a little bit strange. They are. They have to be, because you have to go into space and say, none of you know what you're doing. I know it better than you. That's what you're saying when you disrupt something, right? You all think that so you have to be a little cocky. You have to be a little bit arrogant. And why do you have to do that? Not just to come up with the idea, but because you get beat up all the time. Like most of the CEO's life is getting beat up. I don't get involved when the customer's happy. I'm only involved with customers 95% of the time when they're upset. I'm only involved when an employee wants to leave and I'm trying to convince them to stay. I don't have an employee come to me and say, hey, Reggie, I want to set a meeting up with you and just tell you I'm here for the next 5 years and I just want to tell you everything's going great. So CEOs are brought, this as leaders, you're brought up in a lot of negative energy. We get a lot of positive energy actually going to events like this, going to external things, because internally you tend to focus on problems. And we're a culture, look, unfortunately, I even apologize every year, every quarter to my team saying, look, you do 100 things right and 3 things wrong. What do? You focus on the 3 things that are wrong. And, we need to focus more on the 97 things they did right, but that is a culture of perfection. So getting back to the core question, which is how much of the leadership is the CEO? Look, my really strong belief in my company in particular, because I've had so many in my original team, I have 7 of my original 11 leaders with me still today. Right, so it's not really me, it's the team. It's like a founding team. But then I have people who have been here 10, 15, 20 years that weren't the founding, but they joined us 3 or 4 years later, which is the same thing. So for us, it really is the culture set by the team, but the CEO has a disproportionate impact. And so that's what I would say. But look, the CEO does drive it. At the end of the day, the CEO sets the tone of the culture. And whether it's good, bad, positive, negative, they do have the largest disproportionate. But what makes a great culture is when you have a large amount of leaders buy into that culture and they all lead that. And look, this is what I tell my team. When they're leaders, I say, listen, it's again kind of a quote that I love hearing about. And basically, what it says is that when you're becoming a leader, success is measured on how you are growing personally. When you're a leader, you measure success by how much your people around you are growing. And so that kind of philosophy is, hopefully embodied within our leaders and to empower the people underneath them. So I really hope that you can't scale to a company, a large-scale company, unless it's not about the CEO, it's not even about the executives. We're talking hundreds of people depth of leadership kind of moving in the same direction. That's the only way you can do it sustainably. You could have a powerful personality and drive it, but you got to scale beyond a person. And the greatest time, and I'll just tell you, for me, we had a happy hour, I remember, in Sequoia, and this was, I don't know, what's called 10 years ago, and I remember an employee came up to me, and we were talking, and he goes to me, what do you do at the company? And of course, I was like, it's like, oh, well, I do a little bit of that. I didn't realize. And then he goes, oh, are you in the engineering department? He finally said, I said, no, I'm not in the engineering department. And but what was to me was he didn't realize that told me success, because the company moved beyond me. They didn't know who I was. They didn't join because of me. It was beyond me. And so now the same thing with the company and leadership. It's not about me. I don't know what's going on with 90% of the company because we have strong leaders, and the leaders are, as a whole, hopefully following 80 to 90% of the same path. So I think great leadership is building that scale, empowering people. And like I said, now you have to empower your people underneath you. And you know, that's what makes great leadership.
Well, thank you so much, LGW. Thank you for all my colleagues who are here today, and a special thanks to you, Reggie, for imparting your lessons in leadership. Thank you.
Thanks, Jermaine.
Yeah,
I appreciate
absolutely.
it.
Thank you.